Good evening and welcome to Beyond Room 313 Symposium, the talk show where we have a dialogue and a discourse with our guests, where it's not just a basic interview show. We interview people that have similar topics of interest that we do. And tonight is Ben Emlyn-Jones of Hypano, which is a hospital porter against the New World Order, I think. And I've known Ben for a while, and I've followed his posts for years, and he's always been a good touchstone for me for paranormal, Fortean topics. Ben has a deep interest in the alien and UFO, or UAP as it's called now, phenomena, and he's written a couple of books on it. And he does speak quite eloquently on the subject, and he's quite open-minded. And although he tends to be kind of in the traditionalist mode, he's not close-minded, which is one of the reasons I wanted him on this show, is because he is flexible in how he approaches things. And so welcome to the show, Ben. I'm delighted to have you here.
Oh, hello, Thomas. It's good to see you again. Good. We've been a while since we last saw each other. Hello, Jason. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too, Ben. It's nice to have you on.
No.
Okay, first question is we ask all our guests is pretty much a straightforward one. What got you interested initially in the path that took you down the Fortean paranormal UFO route that we all spend so much of our lives now being fascinated by?
It's a tricky one, this one, because it's the question most interviewers usually ask me first, and there's no definitive answer because there's no sort of red pilling moment for me like some people have. I think I've always been interested in strange topics. I remember having books as a small child about UFOs, about monsters, about ghosts and things like that. I remember loving TV series and programs about it. I used to like ghost hunting stories and things like that. And I think this sort of solidified as I matured, because I remember being in the 90s. I remember being vaguely interested. I remember reading Timothy Good, for example, the UFO author in the 90s. I had sort of various experiences over the course of my life that has led me in a certain direction, taking it more seriously. For example, in 1996, I had a very interesting encounter when I woke up. I had what someone called hypnopompic experience, which was quite intense. I woke up from a deep sleep in the early hours of the morning. Immediately awake, sat up in bed, and it was one of those strange moments where you normally, like a dream carries on. You know how you have a dream that sort of continues slightly. That's what a hypnopompic experience is. This wasn't a dream. I hadn't been dreaming about this. I don't remember what I was dreaming about at the time. But I sat up and I looked over, and I saw a small boy kneeling on the floor of my bedroom. And he was a boy. He's definitely a young boy, and I could see him quite clearly, except he wasn't solid looking. He was translucent in his appearance. He looked like he was made out of smoke that kept its shape. And it must have had some luminosity to it as well, because it was dark in my room. So it must have been slightly incandescent for me to see it. And as I watched it, this apparition, he was wearing some kind of long nightgown. I think it was, or something came down to his knees. He had his hands like that in front of his face as if he was saying his prayers. As I watched, he lifted up into the air and he turned and looked at me, and our eyes met, and then he just faded away over a period of about 1.5 seconds. And I wasn't frightened by that. I just thought, blimey. And it's one of these things I can't really prove. I can't really prove it wasn't it was just my head, but it was such a vivid experience, and one that's not really been repeated. It was not one I had before or had since. But it got me thinking. I think it really got me thinking about paranormal subjects. I think I took more of an interest then. I really did. It's hard for me to gather. I've had several bouts of amnesia over the course of my life, so it's often hard for me to remember every single thing that happened to me. But I know I must have had some kind of interest in those early years. And then over the course of the next few years, I became more and more interested in UFOs. I had a burgeoning passion for the subject. I think I read more and more books. I ended up reading David Icke, who I found he was very, very influential on me. And also started reading Jonathan Downes as well, the cryptozoologist. He was very interesting as well. He's primarily interested in monster hunting. His autobiography is called Monster Hunter, but he also writes on other subjects as well, like the occult and things like that. He's had several mystical experiences and had several. Some of them were quite disturbing, actually, because he was taking various kinds of drugs. But he writes quite eloquently on these sorts of things, and also he's written a book on UFOs as well. And then I started my blog, Hospital Porters Against the New World Order, Hapanwang, in 2006. I wrote an original blog for a few months, gave it up, and then came back with another one a few months later. I also started attending the Probe conference. I don't know if you've ever been to that one, Thomas, but it's
no, I know about it though. Maria Wheatley told me about it. It was quite a good one. I heard.
Maria was a regular there. Sadly, it's discontinued now. But I went to that I went to that continuously. I loved it, and I went to other conferences, and then I met you. I met you, and I met some other people that we know. Ian R. Crane, the late great Ian R. Crane. I really got to like him, and I watched a lot of his videos and things. And I think now I've reached a point where this is something I've dedicated my life to. I'm really quite, I suppose I'm obsessive about it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, well, I think that's quite a healthy thing in many ways, because being obsessive is kind of like a hard word that we throw into things, but
obsessed maybe.
Passionate would be better.
Yeah,
I think, because it's definitely like beyond the hobby. When you get into things this level, it's beyond the hobby, and it has meaning. There's an actual meaning to this. That it's not just like fiction or a hobby watching a TV show. There's an ultimate reality to this. Now, having said that, it's July, just the beginning of July 2021, and we recently had the whole hullabaloo about disclosure again in the United States. And how do you feel about the recent disclosure event?
It's so extraordinary, actually. I'm having trouble keeping up with it. It's something I never predicted would happen. From December 2017, where all this latest series of incidents kicked off, I did wonder at the time, is this going to lead to somewhere more and more, or is it just like a one-off? And it did. It's over 2018. It was a little bit. I did think it might just fade away over 2018, because that was a very, very year when not much happened. But then it's really took off since then, and I'm find it an extraordinary development. It's not just the information that's come out, but the way the media are treating it. The media has changed its policy on the reporting of UFOs for the first time, I think, since 1947. I mean, literally, it was a 70-year policy they had, which they really never really broke away from. They never really deviated from this policy in 70 years. And it can be summed up by the Cutler Twining memo. He wrote to Admiral Roscoe Hillencutter, the first head of the CIA. This was in 1947, and said that we know that these flying saucers are real. We know that. We know that they're not made on Earth, but we don't want this being generally accepted by the population. So in the media, we should treat this subject with official ridicule and denial. That's not an exact quote, but that's kind of what it said. This official ridicule and denial can be seen in all areas of the way it's reported. I mean, there's, whether it's the toy spaceships they always fling into the studio at the end of the news, or the X-Files music they play, or the 5 tones from Close Encounters or something like that. They make a joke out of it.
Yeah.
Now, for some reason, that changed very suddenly in December 2017. And since then, what's been happening then could be interpreted in a number of different ways. And it all depends on what the final agenda is for whoever made this decision. It could be that they're giving people, the general public, a crash course in ufology, so that when they come clean on it, on what they know, if that happens, people won't freak out. It's a kind of mental decompression, a bit like what they do with divers when they bring them up from the deep sea. They have to do it very slowly. Sometimes it takes a couple of days, or keep them in a pressurized container so they don't explode, basically. It could be that this is a mental version of that. because people that the 70-year truth embargo, as Steve Bassett calls it, is their creation. It's the creation of the government, and it's done. I think it's been very unhealthy to keep people in that, rather like keeping a diver very, very deep under the sea. It's because it's essentially meant that they can't immediately just tell people the truth, because for various reasons, not least that people will take it very badly, I think, if they're just suddenly given every single piece of truth. Also, is the fact that they're going to have to find some way to spin their way out of the fact that the truth embargo even existed at all. That's the I think even bigger problem for them. They're going to have to justify why they kept it quiet, because this is questions that's going to be asked. If that's the case, people are going to say, well, why did you keep it quiet all that time? Now, one thing that's possible we should be on our guard against is that this is some bluff, that it's going to end with possibly some scenario where the government will pretend that there are evil aliens out there that are out to get us.
Yeah.
And that they can say, well, look, we need some kind of global state of emergency to deal with this. We need to basically suspend civil rights, cancel elections, create new government departments, more taxation. Basically, very similar to what they're doing with the, I don't know if I can say it, the C word, this disease that's sweeping across the world at the moment. You know, they're using that, I think, to justify an awful lot of government control, whether it's putting masks on your faces or lockdowns and things like that. I think if people believe there are evil aliens out there, then if the government can convince them that we're under attack from beings from another planet, as Ronald Reagan said, you know, a threat from beyond this earth, I think people would probably not object to the loss of more and more civil liberties. And that's what concerns me. That's why Dr. Stephen Greer is concerned about this. I think he goes a bit over the top, but I think he's right to put this point across that might be happening. So I don't want to become too paranoid, though. I mean, Greer is actually very convinced that this is the case. I'm not sure, because if we become too cynical about this, we may miss an opportunity. So I think we've got to tread a path between extreme naivety and extreme cynicism.
Well, this whole thing of weaponizing the experience has been simmering since Roswell anyway. And all through things like the Project Bluebeam and so on. Mm-hmm. And I think another reason why the establishment, apart from control, is that they don't have to explain it, because I think they don't know what it is either. And it would be very frightening for many of the public to find out that there's these things in our world that the military can record doing remarkable things, but at the end of the day can't explain what they actually are, mm-hmm. how they work, or who sent them. I think that would cause a seismic shock, because that would be the ultimate fear for them. And they calling them an alien puts it into a nice package.
Governments do not like admitting they don't know things.
Yeah.
And sorry, Thomas.
No, it's okay. Jason was going to want to say something, I think.
Yeah, Ben, I was watching one of your videos where you mentioned, I think it was Eisenhower, and was it like 1954, saying that allegedly they were working with aliens on making some kind of trade thing there. And that always brings me to the point where, to me, I see the UFO phenomena as something in an entirely separate category and separate bag than actual extraterrestrial life, where if there was extraterrestrial life, it wouldn't be coming in spaceships. It wouldn't be lights in the sky. You know, if there were some kind of federation or confederation that existed, they might look, human, and we wouldn't even be able to separate the difference between what we look like and they look like. But I was just wondering what your thoughts might be on that idea that we've got, this unknown aerial phenomena thing that we don't know what it is. We talk about it here. Thomas talks about it a lot, is, the same kind of thing with the fairy folklore with, alien abductions aren't something new, as you mentioned. People have been having missing time and going off into other realms since as long as, recorded history has existed on this planet. But if that's all one category, there's got to be this other category that if there is, or if there was at one point life in space, the two probably don't ever meet in the middle. And the Eisenhower thing, if there was off-planet or interdimensional whatever forces, that those two categories aren't meeting, and perhaps they they're spinning up a lot over here in the media with this UFO thing to keep us focused on that.
The idea of an alien treaty has never really quite gelled with me. I mean, there's reports that Eisenhower met with an alien. In fact, I've just finished watching a film all about that. I wrote a review on Hapanmo Voice about it. It's called The 11th Green. Very, very good film about dramatization of all that. However, when it comes to treaties, I don't think humans would have much to bring to the table. The aliens don't really, whatever they are. I mean, I think they may be more than one thing, and they're possibly being generically categorized into a single phenomenon when they may actually be more than one actual phenomenon. Same with ghosts, actually. I believe they do abduct people. They're people who've experienced abductions. Sometimes these can be pleasant. Mary Rodwell has written about how pleasant. There's some of them seem to be quite benevolent beings. Others are. Most of them appear to be quite neutral. They often result in a physical examination of some kind, medical tests and things like that, and then the person is then returned to their normal life unharmed. Sometimes with strange symptom marks on the body, things like that, strange smells coming off them, animals, dogs bark at them and things like that. But no real damage. There are a minority that do appear to end up with people who really do suffer quite badly. There's been disappearances, permanent disappearances, result connected to alien abduction and deaths. Now, I don't think they seem to be able to do this whenever they like, wherever they like. People have been abducted from their beds when they're in a double bed with next to someone else, next to their partner. There's even video footage of amazing. There's an amazing, believe it or not, video footage of this actually happening, captured by a man in the north of England. It's not like they need our permission really to do these things. And what Thomas was saying is what earlier he said they don't know what they are and they don't want to admit it. The governments would hate to admit that they'd hate to stand up and say, look, this is happening. All this, including like the cattle mutilations and things like this. Some farmers have lost like hundreds of animals, and they've just been left with these strange injuries. And other animals, wild animals, and sometimes even humans turn up with these injuries, dead. There's a guy in Brazil, a case in Brazil, things like that, where that happened. The government would hate to say, this is happening. If you suffer from this, we can't stop you. We can't protect you. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
I think they'd hate to admit that because they've always got to put on a positive face and say, yeah, well, don't worry, we've got this under control, guys. Even if it's not true, they'll say they have.
Which brings that whole, why they suddenly being so open about it. Makes it so strange.
Yeah, this is what I'm trying to work out now. So, what is this really all about? I'm actually doing a presentation at a conference the Basis Project next weekend, and I'm doing a presentation which is going to include a segment on trying to work out what all this is about. Are they really going to come clean with what they know? And it's probably quite limited what they know. They may have more footage of objects in the sky, including very clear close encounters footage of them, even the beings as well. They may even have physical evidence in the form of crash debris or dead aliens and things like that. They may have those, but they won't be able to tell us exactly what these things are. I don't think they'll be able to tell us that, where they come from, what they want with us. They probably don't know that. And are they going to stand there and admit that? No. It's going to be tricky. I'd like to see the spin doctor that can write them a speech for that. I'll tell you.
Well, they definitely have a spin coming. When you have awful TV reporters all over the world, when they reported stuff a few years ago, it was like, so have aliens arrived to find Elvis and bring him to meet Bigfoot? And now you're seeing them saying the U.S. government is about to disclassify, and they're also, the tone has completely changed, and it's obviously come from some central point to tell them all this, that we're now reimagining or reframing this whole phenomena in terms of the public consciousness. And I see all these doofuses that I know who used to slag off any kind of interest in aliens or UFOs are all like, oh, well, it has to be something to it because, they're terribly clever now because the government has given me approval and given me the endorsement where I can actually talk like I know something, this nonsense. Yeah. But I think Jason and I have spoken about this. I think a defining element in all this is Oumuamua. Would you like to tell us how you feel about that?
That is really quite extraordinary. I've actually read a book by A.V. Loeb, the astronomer, and his book Extraterrestrial. I've written an article for UFO Truth magazine about this, and it's absolutely fascinating because this is coming straight out of a completely different angle. This is an object. This is an object which was originally mistaken for an asteroid out in space by astronomers. It was picked up by the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii, and it moved past the Earth, around the sun, past the Earth so quickly that they suddenly realized this is not an asteroid. This actually comes from outside our solar system. Professor Loeb was the leader of the team that wrote the first paper on this and did the study on it. And it's, to begin with, it displays some extraordinary properties. Now, to begin with, it was following a parabolic course. It was obeying Kepler's laws. And there's nothing to indicate it was anything other than a big rock. However, this is a very strange looking rock. There was no close-up photos of it, but they can tell by differences in brightness that it's very long. It's either very flat or very thin, and it's about 10 times as long as it is wide. And there's several images, artist impressions have come out about it, including the famous one, which is known as the turd picture, because that's what it looks like, making it look very much like a natural object. It just looks like a lump of rock. But then it gets much more interesting, because as the object past the orbit of Jupiter, it's traveling very, very fast. It's past the orbit of Saturn now. It's extremely far. It's traveling very fast. It began to change course. It began to move onto a different course, away from the parabolic path it was supposed to follow, because objects in space their movements can be predicted very precisely, because they follow the laws of gravity. Everyone knows where the gravity is. It's gravity that propels and moves these objects. Now, like the Earth goes around the sun, we always know where it's going to be. If you want to know in 1,000 years' time where the Earth is going to be, you can work it out. It's very, very regular. We have our solar year based on that. The Oumuamua objects, the only exceptions to that rule are comets, right? Comets actually do have an internal propulsion system, which is the form of evaporating ice, which acts to move the object. It basically, you have a huge cloud of steam that bursts out of the object and can sometimes move it. Now, but it tends to move in a very irregular way, though, not smoothly like Oumuamua did. The only other exception are artificial objects with a propulsion system. That's the only other exception. And Professor Loeb, in his book, he explains how he came to this conclusion. He went through all the evidence, and he says this is the only thing that fits. And he published his book. This guy's quite senior. I mean, he's got a lot to lose. I forgot his title, but he's at Harvard University. He's head of the astrophysics department, and he's got a special title to his name because he's very, very important. He's really he's had a lot of aggravation. I mean, I've seen him on like Zoom calls where the other astronomers have been really rude to him.
I saw that too, yeah.
And they really, one of them actually said, "Oh, why couldn't this just be a normal object? Why do you even need to talk about this, AV?" And he says, "I'm just doing my job as a scientist." But if this is moving by itself, I mean, imagine what happens if it turns around and comes back. I mean, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? But this is making people think differently. It's just, this Oumuamua is making, it's not in itself something we can like point out and go, wow, because it's so far away. It's like beyond the orbit of Saturn now. But it's getting people's attention focused on in a particular way. It's focusing on a particular area of knowledge. There would be a knock-on effect on ufology for this. The same thing with Mars. I mean, if they find life on Mars now, or they declassify life on Mars, the same thing will happen. It's not actual UFO in itself, but you could say that Oumuamua might well be. But it's going to get people thinking in a certain frame of mind, which might make them more. It might make it fit better if, for example, the government does give us more information, whether true or false.
I knew immediately that it wasn't natural. Right, I've been long interested in astronomy, and as soon as I saw the thing, assuming they were telling us the truth, and well, they were at the time. That thing changed direction drastically. Now there is a thing called outgassing, where gas is trapped inside these objects, are released when it gets closer to the sun, and they act almost like small propulsion jets.
That's the comments.
They don't change direction. What they do is they do slight deviations within the trajectory of Kepler's laws of motion. They don't go to the left or to the right like this thing did. They don't make a very severe turn. And immediately right then, the first thing, that's a machine. End of, that's a machine. If they're telling us the truth and they have the data correct, that was a machine.
Yeah, outgassing is comment. Yeah, like you said, they don't, when they outgas, they use it's what's Loeb called herky jerky movements, which means they tend to act like a cat and wheel firework that's come off its pivot and just spin around. Yeah. Also, outgassing only occurs when the object is near the sun. Yep. Once you get out as far as Saturn, it's very cold. There's no liquid water, just ice, and any ice on the comet any water on the comet would have frozen by then. So I actually do think Professor Loeb is right. He thinks it may be some kind of solar sail. Maybe even, he just says it may be a bit of junk. It may not actually have aliens on board or anything like that. It may not be here for any purpose. It might just been left in space, a piece of rubbish that we're lucky enough to have come close to. There's no way of knowing unless you can get something closer to that. I mean, I love it if they send a rocket up there, but it'll take a long time. Yeah, the actual smooth nature of the movement of the object indicates that it is doing something which a solar sail would do. An object is literally designed to use solar particles as propulsion. If he's right, I mean, I think he's been through all the possibilities. In his book, he explains it so well. He explains exactly why he came to this conclusion from a proper scientific point of view.
When I keep looking at Oumuamua and what we were talking about here, about it being some sort of technology, I always in my mind draw a connection between it and whatever it is that people call the Black Knight satellite that seems to be in a geosynchronous orbit. That, in my opinion, it seems like perhaps, I don't know how long ago, in one of our previous civilization cycles here on Earth, we may have had, the ability to send probes up into space, and we're just now starting to come into with our ability to read shit in space, that we're seeing some of our own technology from last time around, and perhaps the Black Knight or whatever they call the Black Knight, and then this thing out there are the last iteration that we made of a Voyager type spacecraft. That this time around we sent Voyager, two of them out, 2 Voyagers, I think.
Yeah.
We sent the Voyager crafts out, and perhaps now we're just seeing something like that. That if it did, it's running on some kind of power supply, and it's automated. Just like if this civilization were to fall, when it does fall, we're still going to have satellites out there that our great grandchildren will know nothing about. And one day, one of these things is going to come down. They're going to be like, "What the fuck is this?" It's just going to blow their minds. And it's like, "Oh, well, actually, we're using that. That's just a GPS satellite." Something like that.
Well, I mean, I don't know how stable the orbits of satellites are. I mean, it could be like the Black Knight. It's possible that the Black Knight satellite is actually being kept there by some kind of force, because someone told me that satellites can't stay up that long because the vestiges of the upper atmosphere would drag them down eventually over time because of friction. But I don't know. That might not be true. There may be some that are stable enough to remain there longer, some of the higher up ones. But also, what you've just said, though, Jason, also applies to some of the things that have been spotted on the moon. There are what looks like artificial structures on the moon. Some people have said, "Oh, that's the alien bases." Maybe, but it may also be what you've just said. It could be that in the past we got to the moon first, and maybe there were bases on the moon. Then, for whatever reason, the civilization fell, as they do. I don't accept that human progression goes from primitive barbarism up to high civilization in a linear form. It's a cycle, like you said. And indeed, Graham Hancock and other people, and Rand Flemath and other people, have found there are certainly the remains of such artifacts from the distant past on the Earth. Large constructions made of stone are all that's remains now. But we're talking about things that were around during the Ice Age, 10, 20,000 years ago. Things like Göbekli Tepe. Absolutely, these need explaining, because we're told that there was no one around there except cavemen with stone tools. And that's the only people who ever existed before us, before our civilization. I don't buy it. I think we went sure there were cavemen with stone tools back in the ancient times. Well, there are still some here today in New Guinea and places like that. There are people who are still in the Stone Age.
Yep.
Not the whole world doesn't progress at the same rate. Different geographical areas, you'll get more progression than in others. And some areas which in the very remote places where there's much less transport, they will progress slow. We even see it within this country where people in small villages tend to have more old-fashioned things. I've noticed, them less technological.
And that's what I keep thinking. Like, if there was a interplanetary civilization that we got to that's maybe 50 years more advanced, just like that meme somebody posted recently about United States, or our aviation technology in 1911 versus space technology in 1960. If there was maybe 50 more years of spacefaring technology, we would be able to make something like the Black Knight that has just this ability to stay locked there. So if we did, if people were born on other planets or other space stations or something, the ability to stay there, and this whole extraterrestrial thing people keep talking about, that perhaps there are people left over from the previous cataclysm that have been isolated from us, and we're just now starting to reconnect with them, just the way like people when we're just talking to someone about the different isolated civilizations on like the Polynesian islands, and those people didn't know that they had cousins and family members over across the Pacific on New Zealand or down in Australia or over in the Americas. And it might be the same kind of thing where there's more of us that were left over from the last time around, and perhaps that's what the actual ET phenomena is, that they're not gray aliens and all that. That's part of the fairy folklore thing with the abductions and all that. That's interdimensional. That could be an entirely separate subject that has nothing to do with people that live, on other planets or on space stations or whatever, human created things where we found a technology to do that. And we're just now saying, hey, what's up to our cousins? Not in the way that they were talking about of, lay down your nuclear armaments because space Jesus is coming back. Not that kind of thing. I'm not going that direction, but more like, just like the Polynesian thing where, hey, we're the same thing. And, there's a big, terrible cataclysm that occurred last time around. The space, had a big, the sun had a big fart and, blew up everything or something to that extent. But that's where my crazy ass goes with this stuff. And I just wondered what you and Thomas's thoughts are on that.
Well, should I go first? Is that all right, Thomas?
I'll go first because I just have a quick comment on that, and then Ben can take over. There's a megalith on one of the moons of Mars. That alone is like, what the hell? I saw Buzz Aldrin talking about it, and that alone for me is enough to say there is probably a civilization on the inner planets anyway, at some point, or exploration or something.
That's I saw that. That was incredible. That was. It certainly what you said, Jason. It would certainly explain why some of the aliens appear to look like us. Some people actually who've had encounters with these beings, are sometimes told that they are like us, and indeed, where there is communication, you get things like they say we've been watching you for many, many years, things like that, many centuries, many millennia. There are even people who claim to be related to these beings, as if these beings, when they come down, they do actually sometimes they'll produce young babies with a human, things like that. It could be because if they came from Earth originally, they want to do something genetically to us, or to them, either to us or to them. They want some kind of genetic change, or to create a certain kind of genetics where we're brought back together again slowly. I don't know. It would certainly explain, on what you said, it would certainly explain the appearance of so many extraterrestrials. Some of them do indeed look very human-like. I think if you put them in normal clothes and walk them down the streets, you probably wouldn't give them a second look. Some of them they have like extra large eyes, for example, or very, very blonde hair. The ones that Jessie Rustenberg saw in 1954 above her house in Staffordshire, that was quite an amazing case. She described them as having bright blue eyes, bright blonde hair, all cut neatly into page boy bobs, just staring down at her. Now, if you put one of those guys in her normal clothing and just, if you saw him sitting on the bus, she probably wouldn't have remarked on them very much. I mean, she may have thought, oh, that's odd features, but you wouldn't stare. It's only because she saw them on a flying saucer above it, sitting in a flying saucer above her house, that it's so remarkable.
The one story that encapsulates all this for me, it's my favorite Fortean story, is the Mothman story. It started out with the massive UFO flaps along the classic UFO flaps along the Ohio Valley, followed by this remarkable experiences with the Men in Black, and then followed by the appearance at what we call a cryptid event, leading to the collapse of the Silver Bridge. Now, the most interesting part for me in all that is the Men in Black. They do seem to be connected to these UFO sightings. How do you feel about the Men in Black phenomena?
There's two main theories about the Men in Black. One is that they're government agents sent out to cover up, to help cover up UFOs. The other is they are in some way connected to the UFO phenomenon itself. I think the latter is more likely in most cases. The way they behave, the way they look, the fact that they just turn up out of nowhere. They're often driving weird, strange cars, sometimes old-fashioned cars that look very new. The fact that their features, sometimes their features look odd, like they're very pasty or they have exaggerated certain areas of their behavior. Sometimes their behavior is stilted. Their voices sound strange. I think they're connected to the UFO phenomena itself in some way. They are seen regularly when in areas where there's a lot of UFO sightings. This includes in places where people haven't heard of the Men in Black, including Jim Templeton, who took a photograph in 1964 of his daughter, and you get this like alien creature in the background. He was visited by the Men in Black, but the Men in Black hadn't been popularized back then. John Keel hadn't written about them. He was the guy who first pioneered all this study. There's also, they sometimes can be associated with space-time anomalies. Now, you get a lot of that with the Mothman prophecies. A huge amount of like space-time anomalies. Loads of people have missing time. Sometimes people appearing in the same place, the same person appearing in two different places simultaneously, stuff like that. It was all kinds of really weird stuff. There was also this figure that was called Indrid Cold, who just seemed to pop up in places. A guy with a broad smile. He was sometimes called the Smiling Man. He was just, people would be driving along, they'd encounter him on the road. He was just like standing in the middle of the road, and when they spoke to him and they finished speaking to him, they find it was like 5 hours later and they were on a completely different road in another part of the town. It's a very odd story there, very odd indeed. And even though the Mothman could be described as a cryptid, it's more like what Jonathan Downes calls a not pseudo-cryptid, a zooform phenomenon. Although it's not really, it has resemblance to some animals, the wings and things like that, but it's more like the winged humanoid. It's basically a humanoid form with wings coming from the shoulder area. And you see the same thing. Angels are depicted like that in church stained glass. Demons often have bat-like wings, whereas angels have bird-like wings. Where angels are only referred to in the Bible occasionally, in the story of Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah. According to that, the angels actually appear to be human. They're not physically described. And if they had big wings, they wouldn't be able to wander around this city. So, who got the idea that these creatures should have wings coming out their shoulders? Don't know where that idea came from.
Spooky when Mothman would fly, the wings wouldn't flap.
Same with the Owlman. The Cornish Owlman he was similar. This is Jonathan Downes actually wrote a book about this. It looked sort of cross between a human and an owl. It was, and it would float. Like you say, it wouldn't flap its wings, but it would just sort of float in the air. It just had these big claws, like it had 2 digits on its feet with huge claws. It was big glowing red eyes. Very similar to the Mothman, although the Mothman is sometimes be associated with the collapse of the Silver Bridge, this terrible disaster where about 40 people, I think, were drowned in the river. when the bridge basically collapsed with some traffic on it
on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, very sad situation. And some people have said that's the Mothman and all its phenomena were somehow some kind of effect in advance, an antecedent effect of the disaster, as if the disaster somehow throws back through some kind of mechanism, throws back a level of shock backwards through time. It could explain why some people have premonitions.
Yeah.
That's very interesting too. Like the guy who was going to get onto the Titanic, and someone said he had a voice in his ear saying, "Don't go, don't go," and he turned back. He didn't get on the Titanic. And then the ship
blow back into present reality.
Mm.
The psychic shock of the event is so strong, it blows back in time and manifests either in dreams or in artwork. Another famous case of those kids in Wales where the coal mine fell on their school and killed them. And they were telling their parents, "I don't want to go to school today," or they were drawing pictures the day before of all the children in the school covered in black. And they had these premonition of the slag heap falling on top of the village school. Horrible story.
Aberfan, yeah, definitely.
That's very similar.
And this is why if you hear somebody give out a warning like this, I say, look, I've just got a really big feeling you shouldn't do this. Don't do this. Don't do that. It's wise actually to take them seriously. And because lives have been saved by people who do believe in premonitions, having these warnings. It's I would always keep my ears open for things like that.
Yeah.
One thing I keep coming back to whenever I'm having a conversation with someone about UFOs is die Glocke, the Nazi bell, and interdimensional technology with that somehow. That if the idea was that, us as humans here on Earth, we probably can't go very far past the core of the Earth or some kind of energetic connection that we have with our own home without having some severe damage. So I really do wonder, if there was life, human life that existed on Mars, that existed on the moon, somewhere else that was non-local, that there'd have to be some kind of tether psychically, energetically, physically, neurologically to the entity of the planet itself. So in order to do that, there'd have to be, in order to get, human beings or living beings onto another planet, there'd have to be some kind of interdimensional device or technology or ritual to unbind someone from this physicality and bind them to another one so that they could live on Mars without the magnetism pulling their beingness back to this planet, so that they could have some kind of anchor, so to speak, to Mars or to Ganymede or to whatever, that one moon that looks like the Death Star. I think it's one of Saturn's moons that has the ring around. Yes. Yeah, that one, it's like, so, die Glocke, I look at that thing and to me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's some kind of like interdimensional portal type of thing that the Nazis and, may have found the schematics to, somewhere underground or something, but,
Who knows? I mean, I know that Heinrich Himmler, he took several trips to various places such as Tibet. He went where there's all kinds of strange things there. He also went to the south of France and examined the Holy Grail mystery. It could be that through people like Sylvia Ortiz, the medium who was working with Himmler and other people within the Nazi regime, they actually made some very interesting discoveries. Now, we know that during World War II, there was before World War II, work on strange objects was underway. There's this place called the Wenceslas mine. Now today it's in southwestern Poland. That used to be part of Germany, and there's a guy called Igor Witkowski who's been trying to unearth the secrets within it, which is a bit difficult because the mine was actually collapsed deliberately through an explosion in 1945 before the invasion by the Red Army. But some of the personnel were evacuated. It's believed, I've heard it talked about, I don't know, it can't be confirmed, because a lot of them went missing, that they were part of Project Play Paperclip. And after the Allies basically invaded and destroyed the country, they took as much as they could of everything, including individuals, experts, and they took them back to the Allied countries under fake. Some of them were under fake identities. People like Werner von Braun used his original identity, and one of them, Hans Kammler, may well have ended up in the United States or in Russia, or even here in Britain, working under a fake name. But what was in there, we don't know. But they were absolutely desperate for it not to be found. But that was allegedly where the bell was being made. It's funny what you say. It's funny you say that, because about the need to maintain some kind of energetic environment where humans can live. In the book, there's two books. There's one called 2/3, and there's another one called Apollo and the Whistleblowers. One's by Mary Bennett and David Percy, and the other one is by Mike Myers and David Percy. And they've talked about how I can't remember all the details. Years ago, I read these books. It's way back in the 90s. In the late 90s, I was really getting into this stuff. But they said that on Mars, there was actually a civilization on Mars. Mars had a very different environment. And that's actually official. We know that because we know there was flowing water on Mars, which means in the distant past, it must have had a much denser atmosphere, and it must have been an awful lot warmer than it is today. And what they claim is that the remains of that civilization are visible around the face on Mars. The face on Mars is just a marker, but there are other structures around it, which these authors say are where they were altering the rotation of the planet and the magnetic field of the planet to make it suitable for the lives of these individuals who are basically like humans. Basically, we're descended from them. They actually came to Earth, and we are their descendants. I can't remember all the details, but it's a fascinating couple of books. They really are.
David Icke also covered that. You were talking about David Icke. I remember reading when he started out, he had books that had lots of Fortean stuff in it, not just politics. And he had mentioned also about that theory that people actually derived from Mars, that the human race is derived originally from Mars, and some cataclysm, and it ties in with the whole Emmanuel Velikovsky and all that kind of thing, that basically they had to get off Mars really quick. The atmosphere was falling away.
Yeah, there are huge volcanoes on Mars. I mean, the biggest that's ever been discovered in the solar system, Olympus Mons, and there's three others. They're actually there's something called the Tharsis bulge, which is actually a deformation of the crust of the planet. It's not even a proper sphere because of enormous volcanism. Now, volcanoes of that size could permanently change a planet's environment.
Yeah,
because they're so huge. They're at least 10, 20 times the size of any volcano on Earth. And it's possible this volcanism did alter the planet to such an extent that it was no longer habitable, and the people did get off. Maybe that's it, because we're not, you see, there's a difference when it comes to human evolution that doesn't quite fit in with the standard model that we evolved from the apes so many million years ago. There are similarities to the primates, and it's possible we are descended from some kind of primate similar to Earth primates. However, there are differences with us that make us unique. I mean, the upright people, scientists always say, yeah, well, we walk upright. We have these flat feet and we walk upright. That's actually not unique. Until about, in fact, a few million years ago, there were many species of apes that walked like we did upright. Bigfoot might actually be a remnant of one of these. But other things that are unique, such as we have a particular type of skin. Our skin is more like the skin of a pig, not a human. It's not an ape. Apes tend to, well, we don't have fur all over our bodies like they do.
We have a layer of sebaceous fat on our stomachs, which no other primate has.
No. Only other animals like pigs have these, but apes don't. You're right. The apes do not have that subcutaneous fat layer. We also have a nose which points downwards. If you look at other apes, like their nostrils point forwards. Now, this actually means that if they're ever in water, if you ever see them going in water, they're very careful not to get their head under the water. If they did, their airways would fill with water, and they'd have to come out quickly to stop themselves drowning. We can actually put our head underwater to us, not very deep. If we go much deeper, we have to hold our nose like that. We can put our head underwater to a certain depth, maybe a couple of feet, and our nose actually traps air in the form of a diving bell. This has led some people to speculate that we might actually have ancestry that was semi-aquatic.
Aquatic ape, yeah.
Yeah, that we might actually have eventually been like some creatures that used to at least swim some of the time in the sea. There's this documentary. I know it's not. It's like it's a mockumentary about mermaids. Don't know if you saw that. It's quite well known about. It's based on real speculative anthropology. That there might be a line of a primate, possibly not from this world, that actually lived in a watery environment in the sea or in the rivers of maybe this planet or maybe other planets. You know, in Mars maybe.
When Thomas and I were making Liber Philosophy, the Jack Parsons documentary that we released on in early May this year, we talked a little bit about the Moonchild ritual that was based on the book Moonchild by Aleister Crowley, where, you know, essentially they're the couple within the story is attempting to bring a lunar entity, so a being of the planet of the moon, and impregnating that into the body of a woman. And to me, whenever I look at that Moonchild ritual, I think of the idea that, just as we're talking about, that there was life, you know, potentially within our solar system, that if the bodies died, potentially the beings, the souls, the life force entity that we are, you know, driving the body, so to speak, are still stuck there in those planets, tied to their tied to the magnetism. I'll just call it magnetism of that planet. And through ritual, you know, perhaps you're able to go and, you know, catch one of those souls in a butterfly net, so to speak, and bring it here onto Earth. And I do wonder, like, if that's something that's possible, where there could be beingnesses still on Mars, on Ganymede, on that one planet we were talking about that looks like the Death Star.
Yeah, it's you know what, it could be that's been done not just by that particular ritual, which is that's an incredible story. That is, I think it's very interesting that it's so close to. It was before Area 51 was built, but it's in that area. It's incredible, but there's you see, people say it looks like the Death Star, and it does. It's not just the large crater that looks like the cannon on the Death Star. It does. It has an equatorial valley, and people say, well, that's interesting. You know, George Lucas, when he made Star Wars, he modeled the Death Star on that planet. Well, that's impossible because the Voyager probe hadn't got to Saturn by the time he made that. When he made that film, it was 1977. Voyager had only just been launched. It hadn't got to Saturn yet. But did he somehow know what Mimas actually looked like?
Even the way in the movie they think it's a moon. That's no moon. You know, it just, even the fact that it was mistaken for a moon in the film is fascinating.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, I mean, and funny enough, Obi-Wan knows, doesn't he? He's not a moon, it's a space station. I know he's like a Jedi, so he has like kind of this psychic ability. But did George Lucas somehow have some kind of flash of insight in that sense?
Science fiction people do have them.
Because someone told me that the way the Death Star is built, because of course it was planned very meticulously. If it had been built in real life, it would also be the same size as Mimas.
Well, Lovecraft, the year before Pluto was discovered, wrote about the planet that was out there beyond Neptune, and described it very much in how the probe that went there about 10 years ago, like they just thought Pluto was a ball of ice. And when the I think it was called the New Horizon probe, went out there and photographed it, it looked very much like how Lovecraft had described the fictional version a year before Pluto's discovery. Valleys of caves of ice, and there was also large desert-like areas which seems to be on Pluto. So I definitely do believe that science fiction people have this ability to kind of like harvest from the future.
Writers and filmmakers, artists like people.
Yeah.
I think they get into a situation where they channel their muse. I think the phrase goes, channel their muse, The muse is supposedly a spirit. It's from Roman mythology that there's a spirit. There's a kind of spirit being called a muse, which gives you inspiration if you have a desire for culture. And it could be that people like George Lucas and like Lovecraft went through moments when they actually did. So they knew what things such as what the outer planets looked like, even though there was no way they could have known because no spacecraft had ever gone there. I've been in situations where I believe I've channeled a muse. When I was writing my first novel, there's a passage in that book, about 5,000 words, that I did within like a single day, and it's just I didn't stop, and I didn't stop writing once, and it's almost letter perfect. I hardly had to change a single thing.
Like a stream of consciousness, shamanic insight. Another one is 2001: A Space Odyssey. At the end of the movie, where it says all these planets are yours except Europa, and now it looks like Europa is the one planet the moon in the solar system world that actually might have life, and it may be an octopus type life. And then we have this new thing now where octopuses are they're seriously considering considering them animals anymore, that they're far too intelligent to be, and it's too strange to be from this planet. So we're living in unbelievable times. I mean, I'm always amazed by people who don't, I feel very blessed to be living in these times with all these revelations happening. And I'm amazed more people don't. And that's one of the reasons we started this show, to actually try and get people to pay attention to how fantastic things are right now.
Oh God, yeah. It's it's a very exciting time to be alive, and I think I personally believe I was put here for a purpose. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I do feel my life has a purpose, and it's possible that this is something I agreed to as a soul contract before my birth. Who knows? I mean, I don't know that. I have no past life memories or anything like that, but it's just a speculation on my part.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Past incarnations, and the memory being impossible because it's a construct of the mind, and the mind being a construct of the body. Where I hold this posit that you can maintain experience from past incarnations. You can't maintain mental pictures from past incarnations because those died with the body. But the experience, the things that you do, the great work, if you want to call it that, of all of your incarnations, you just have to stumble onto the path again. You have to meet the right people, like Thomas and yourself, to go, oh shit, I've done this before. Oh, and then they help you get you back onto your path of your legacy that's always been there.
Yeah. So Ben, before we go, how can people find out about your worldview, your writing, and so on? I'll put your website down the bottom of this so they'll see it all the time. But is there anything else?
Well, my websites, I have a number of them, but they're all Hapanwo. It's HPANWO .blogspot, and there's Hapanwo Voice, Hapanwo TV, Hapanwo Radio. I've also got this book here, Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. Now, this is the first of a trilogy, actually, about what would happen if we got the truth instead of lies. That's what I asked myself, and that led to a speculative scenario, a thought experiment, which ended up with a story, which ended up in a trilogy of novels. So they're £10 each if you want to buy them. I hope you'll enjoy them. If you like this show, you'll probably like my books, actually. I think you will.
And you're going to be at an upcoming Basis conference?
Yes, this weekend. I don't know when people are listening to this, but it's this weekend.
This will go out tonight.
Oh, brilliant. It's this weekend coming at the Basis Project, which is at the Barge in Honey Street, Wiltshire. It's an absolutely beautiful venue. I'll be doing a talk about what will happen. It's called What's Going to Happen Next? ? So I hope to, if not answer that question, at least maybe put people on the right track where things might be going next.
I thought the Barge was actually closed down or something.
I'm pleased to report that it has been reopened in as close to its original form as it has. It was an Italian restaurant for a while, but it was a ridiculous business model. It was always going to fail. So they've gone back to their roots. I'm glad.
Good. Yeah, Jason, it's the pub where all the crop circle people hang out.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful part of England. So if I ever get back there, Ben, we'll have a pint of that ale. Yeah, the beers all have titles like Alien Abduction and stuff like that.
Yes, yes, they do. They're
Love
locally
it.
brewed ciders and beers, and they're all Area 51 cider, Alien Abduction lager, and things like ales and stuff. Yeah,
There's a beautiful canal next to it. It's a beautiful place, actually.
I can't wait to go. I've really missed traveling.
I'm delighted to hear the barge came back, the Italian restaurant.
Yeah, and that's ridiculous.
That's almost blasphemy to turn it like a perfect pub like that into something. Well, good luck there and have a great
Thanks, mate.
time.
Thanks for having me, Jason and Thomas. It's been great fun.
And this will be up tomorrow or something, and we'll put people through to you, and hopefully when any kind of other developments and this stuff have come along, get you back in the future for more discourse on it.
I'll be glad to, anytime.
Brilliant. So thank you, Jason. Thank you, Ben, Emlyn-Jones, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in for another episode of Beyond Room 313 Symposium, and we'll see you for another one real soon. Bye.